Hey everybody, this is Super Testnet, and I just finished doing a presentation for the Bitcoin Startup Lab called Bitcoin Landscape, Pros and Cons of L1s and L2s. And I wanted to share that presentation with you all. So in that version I just recorded, I started on this slide. So let me just go here and then we'll begin. All right, so now I'm going to do this presentation. So this shows at least my view on the different trade-offs of using various layer 1 and layer 2 technologies. And some of the ones I'm going to go over are on the left. This isn't all of the layer 1 and layer 2 technologies that are available for Bitcoin, but these are some of them. And along the top you can see the different categories I've created for positive or advantages and disadvantages of each one. Or actually, they're all advantages, but if you see a no or a depends, I consider that a disadvantage of using that particular technology. So the first one on my list is Bitcoin, Bitcoin's base layer, where we do have, we got a lot of greens in this one. Like if you're going to develop something on Bitcoin's base layer, there are wonderful development tools for doing that. Like I really love to use Bitcoin.js. I love to use Taproot.js. I'm usually a JavaScript developer, but there are also excellent programming tools for pretty much any language you want. We've got like Rust Bitcoin, we've got Python libraries for Bitcoin, we've got stuff for Scala. Like there's a whole bunch of Bitcoin tooling and developer documentation for developing on Bitcoin in pretty much any programming language. So that's really nice, is that you've got all of that in Bitcoin. Of course, in comparison with in comparison with Bitcoin itself, you don't get reduced transaction fees. All of the, let me go back to the previous slide. All of the examples here where I talk about reduced transaction fees, I'm always talking about them in comparison with just using Bitcoin, right? If you're doing something on the base layer, a basic transaction between Alice and Bob, we want to have the smallest transaction fees you can get. And in comparison with Bitcoin, obviously Bitcoin itself doesn't have cheaper transaction fees than Bitcoin. Some of these things do, though. Like you can see, Lightning has lower fees than Bitcoin by nature. So yeah, we don't get reduced transaction fees. Over here, the next one is called serverless contracts. So you might be familiar with the concept of smart contracts, where you can have conditional logic that allows Alice to only pay Bob if some contract executes and returns true. That you can do those on Bitcoin, and we do like. As the previous gentleman explained, Bitcoin script does have some functionality that allows you to do things like swaps and other things. So yeah, we have the ability to do that, and you don't need to run a server for it. One of the things that is common in Bitcoin contracting is many protocols work very similarly to how they work on Ethereum if you run a server. Like if all the parties to the contract are online, you can do a lot by having them coordinate with each other and like sign partially. They can sign Bitcoin transactions together that use logic to define who should get the money. But these things require everyone to be online at the same time, which means everyone's got to basically run a server in order to do that. So with Bitcoin's base layer, we do support some versions of serverless contracts where you basically just put out a Bitcoin transaction, and if someone co-signs it, then it goes through, and you don't have to be online when that happens. So that's really nice. Some of the protocols I'm going to talk about don't really have that feature. Also, self-custody is definitely possible in Bitcoin. The whole not your keys, not your coins thing has become somewhat of a mantra in Bitcoin, and it's really easy to design protocols and tools where everybody has their own keys. So you can even make that a default. It's really easy to make tools where self-custody is the default for all Bitcoin users. And of course, Bitcoin respects the concept of having only 21 million coins that represent all of the economy. You can do that with Bitcoin. You can represent everything that goes on in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Every financial transaction involves this set of 21 million tokens, and that's all you get. So in my opinion, that's a really important feature of Bitcoin, and it's a really important feature of finance, is to have a limited supply of money to represent all financial activity. So trying to respect that is really important to me, and I think that's really important. Over on the right, I'm showing a basic example of a transaction in Bitcoin where user 1 is just going to send a payment directly to user 2. That's the most common way that people use Bitcoin. If you examine a blockchain explorer, every transaction's just almost every transaction is just going to be, you know, Alice sending to Bob. Sometimes you'll get multi-send, where it'll be Alice sending to Bob, Carol, Dave, and Edward. So that happens too, but almost all the time it's just a basic payment. There's no conditional logic. There's no there's nothing fancy. It's just, you know, one person paying one or more other people. But there are, like, you can do more advanced things, and some of those are things that I've defined or are things that have names in the Bitcoin system. So an example of one of these is the next thing on our list, a base layer oracle. So there are a couple of different kinds of this. The gentleman in the previous example, he went over discrete log contracts, which are the latest iteration of using a base layer oracle to make conditional payments in Bitcoin. It has an older cousin called a hash lock contract, where you can do the same thing as a discrete log contract, but with not as good privacy. But there is excellent developer tools for doing hash lock contracts. There's less good developer tools for doing discrete log contracts, only because they're newer and there's a lot fewer implementations of them. But the basic flow is shown on the right. User 1 wants to make a payment to Alice, but only if some oracle says the payment should happen. So this is a common example for how this works is with ball games. So let's say the Packers and the Saints are going to have a football game between each other. One of the things you can do is you can set up an oracle who's going to publish something on Bitcoin which indicates whether the Packers won or the Saints won. And you can have a Bitcoin payment that's conditional on what that oracle says, so such that you send a payment to Alice, or Alice sends a payment to Bob only if the oracle says the Packers won. And then you can have a reverse flow where Bob sends a payment to Alice only if the oracle says the other team won. So that allows you to set up like a ball game contract where two people are going to pay each other based on the outcome of some real world event, or at least what an oracle says about a real world event. So Bitcoin has support for this, and there is really good developer tooling for it. It allows you to add pretty complex logic. Like, it doesn't have to be as simple as a ball game. You could run pretty much anything in that if statement right there. You know, you could have this be the entire Ethereum virtual machine right there if you wanted, and say, you know, Alice only sends a payment to Bob if some contract on Ethereum returns true, and have an oracle to say whether that happens. Of course, some of the negatives of this, base layer oracles do not get any transaction fee benefit. They're going to cost the same as a regular Bitcoin transaction because they are a regular Bitcoin transaction. You're just adding a condition in script that says the outcome is determined based on some third party's statement. Also, do they count as self-custodial? I think that depends on your definition. To me, they do not. I would say if you're requiring that some oracle determine how the flow of funds goes, then there's really you're not in sole control of your money at that point. Once you hit the send button on this conditional payment, you have no control over that money anymore. It's really up to the oracle plus your counterparty whether you get that money back. So I would say those are not self-custodial, but some people would say they are. On the grounds that you have self-custody up to the moment where you hit the send button, right? And at that point, you're not supposed to have control over whether you get your money back. So some people would say, yeah, that still counts. You had custody up until the moment you sent the money away, so that's fine. But I think it really depends, because they could cheat. You know, the oracle could collude with your counterparty to cheat. One of the things that you can do with discrete log contracts and hash lock contracts is the third party, the oracle who's revealing this information, doesn't necessarily know. He doesn't necessarily know that he's involved in a contract. Like, it could be that the oracle is he's going to put an announcement out on Bitcoin whether the Packers won or the Saints won in this upcoming football game, but he doesn't know that anyone's using that information in their contract. He's just putting that information out there, and that can kind of help with making these things a little more palatable to Bitcoiners. It's like, well, it's not like he can. It's harder for him to collude with Bob if he doesn't know that he's involved in a contract with Bob. Of course, that only works if Bob doesn't tell him. Bob could just say, "Hey, I'm doing this, and then can you please make the money go to me? Just always say the Saints won, so that I always get the money." Bob could do that. But yeah, that also would ruin the reputation of the Oracle, so you have some reputational considerations there. One nice thing about hash log contracts and discrete log contracts and all base layer oracles is they do respect Bitcoin's 21 million limit. Once you put that 21 million coin limit in place with Bitcoin, these are just on-chain transactions. They can't inflate the supply at all, so they're really respecting that. One thing that also depends is the serverless contracts. So you're creating a contract here, even with a ball game, where Alice gets some money if one team wins, Bob gets it if the other one wins. That's definitely a contract. Is it serverless? Well, it depends on your definition. When Alice and Bob create the contract, they don't have to have something that's always online. They can just wait until the ball game happens and then come back to finalize their contract to take the signature from the Oracle or the hash pre-image if he uses that method, and use it to take the money. So they don't need to be online. But in another sense, there is a server involved because the Oracle has to be online. Like if he goes offline and never reveals the information, the contract won't work. So the Oracle has to be he has to have reliable internet access in order to make this thing happen. He has to run a server, especially if it's something daily. Like if he's announcing every ball game, he's got to run a server so he can do that. And a lot of these things are used for price gambling. So if the Oracle's reporting on the price of Bitcoin, and Alice and Bob are betting on like over/under situations, the Oracle's got to be constantly online so he can sign for sign for the price of Bitcoin every day or every hour or whatever policy he has. So yeah, you have some downsides here. You don't get any reduced transaction fees as you get with some of these other things we're going to go through, and you do have you have some of this stuff, some custody issues. Okay, so the next one I wanted to go over is Bitpac. Which is one way of doing e-voting and kind of DAO-like structures on Bitcoin. So this is bitpac.org is the website. I launched it a few days ago and decided to put it into this presentation because when you're doing a presentation, sometimes you get to announce your own stuff. So let's talk a little bit about what its features are. Bitpac allows you to have a group treasury. So you create a multi-sig Bitcoin address controlled by a large group of people. And any funds that are in that address, the group gets to vote on how to spend them. So we track, someone can write a proposal that has a Bitcoin transaction where they'd like to send some of the money to some destination, and that'll only go through if the multi-sig votes to approve that transaction. So let's say it's a 6 of 10 multi-sig. It'll only happen if you get 6 signatures on that transaction that say, yes, I want to spend the money to this destination. So this allows you to do voting with Bitcoin. You can actually keep track of how many votes have been sent in favor of a proposal. And if a bunch of people just say, I'm not going to sign this, then you can just say, okay, it can't meet the threshold anymore, and so you can kind of bury that proposal. But this allows you to do DAO-like structures and e-voting directly on Bitcoin just by counting signatures for a proposal. So because I just released this, it doesn't have good dev tools. It's just got one website, bitpac.org, and no API or anything. You can just kind of click buttons to do it, to do these contracts. It doesn't have any reduced transaction fees because it is just, these are all Bitcoin transactions, and since they're just standard Bitcoin transactions, they cost as much as a regular Bitcoin transaction costs. No reduced fees there. This is kind of a typical feature of all L1 technologies. If you're doing everything on the base layer, it's going to cost as much as if you're doing everything on the base layer, because you are. So you don't get any transaction fee reduction there. Do you get serverless contracts? Yes, you do actually with this. You don't need none of the parties to a Bitpac need to run a server. They all get to just log on whenever they want and check what the various proposals are and how they've been voted on. Don't have to run a server, and you can just you can use it like that. Actually, I designed it that way in order to correct for what a problem I perceive with base layer oracles, which is that someone needs to run a server for those things. So I designed Bitpac so that you don't, and that's really nice. You can actually use this. You can set up something like a base layer oracle with this. Like if Alice and Bob want to bet in a ball game, they can bring someone in as a third party without even telling them that they're involved if they don't want to. And only bring them in if there's a dispute. like if you make a 2 of 3 multisig with someone in a Bitpac, then you can just vote to send the money to Alice if she won, or send the money to Bob if he won. And if both parties cooperate, then you've got 2 of the 3 signatures you need, and everything's hunky-dory. You never even needed to tell the third party. But then if there's a dispute, if one says I won, and if both parties claim they won, then they won't be able to come to a resolution on that. So that's when you can go to the third party and bring them in and say, hey, we have this contract between us, can you please adjudicate it? But here the third party didn't know that he was involved until he got called in, and also he didn't need to run a server. He can just see each proposal, see what the terms of their contract were, and then vote one way or the other to add the second signature for that. So this allows you to kind of fix one of the problems with the base layer oracles, which is that it needs a server to run, but yeah, it has some downsides. It also has the same problems of custody. If you're using a multisig and you're just one key in like a 2 of 3 situation, any money you put into that address is not in your control anymore. You only have one key, and you need 2 in order to spend the money. So you don't have custody anymore. But you have partial. You have kind of joint custody with a couple of other people. So that can be pretty cool. And it is possible to make these things where like you need unanimous consent on how to spend them. So you could make like a 10 of 10 multisig where all 10 people need to unanimously agree on how to spend it, and that would give you at least you would know that you have as much control as everyone else in that situation. Or you could make a 1 of 1 where you're the only person who has the money, and then it's definitely fully custodial. So depending on your definition of what counts as non-custodial or as self-custodial, these things fall into that category. But to me, it doesn't. If you don't have all the keys, you don't have custody of the funds, in my opinion. It does, because it's a base layer protocol. It does respect the 21 million coin limit of Bitcoin. You can't use Bitpacs to inflate the supply or create additional tokens. 21 million reflects all economic activity, which is, in my opinion, the best way to be. The next tool I want to go over, actually, before I go over to the next tool, I want to see if there are any questions. So I'm going to go over here and just see. Nope, no questions. Great. If there are any, I'll periodically check to see if anyone has any questions about this stuff. So the next one I wanted to go over is the Lightning Network, and so let's do that. The Lightning Network is, of course, it has a lot of greens. It's got great developer tools. I think LND's developer toolset is some of the best I've ever seen. It really does go into like everything you can do with the Lightning Network daemon. Electrum's got really good documentation. I think something like LNbits is a really good tool for interacting with the Lightning Network and making it very easy for developers to use all the features and even add new features. There's excellent resources for working with Lightning. You do get reduced transaction fees in comparison to Bitcoin because the way Lightning works, you have a channel. You have a channel which is a multi-signature Bitcoin address, and a bunch of transactions happen internally in that channel that aren't reflected on the base layer. So the moment you create one of these, you have to do one Bitcoin transaction, but then you get like an infinite number of Bitcoin transactions you can do within that channel, and they're not reflected on chain, so they don't cost anything, which is really nice. You can have like an infinite number of transactions that don't cost anything. So yeah, Lightning Network is great for that. You get really reduced transaction fees. Once you start using the network part, once you start going from my channel to your channel to someone else's channel, you do get transaction fees. So far, they've been pretty low, but yeah, we'll see if they stay that way. Can you do serverless contracts? Well, I talk about down here that this is compatible with Lightning oracles. So there are a few solutions for having an oracle based contract on Lightning. And it's compatible with that, so you can kind of do a contract similar to a DLC or a hash lock contract. You can do that with Lightning, where Alice and Bob set up a conditional payment to each other, and then they can go offline. They don't need to run a server. But like with hash lock contracts and discrete log contracts, a Lightning oracle needs to run a server if they're doing anything that's like daily or hourly, like Bitcoin price gambling. If they're facilitating that, then you've got to be online the whole time. Or if it's like, if it's a ball games or whatever, you've got to be online every day to say who won the ball game. So yeah, there's that, and then there's is self-custody possible? Well, yeah, it definitely is possible. I mean, I've very many Lightning wallets are self-custodial, and some of them are really good. So that you can definitely do that. Is it the default? Kind of depends. The last gentleman said that 90% of Lightning users are on custodial wallets. I don't know how he's getting to that figure. That seems likely to be a high estimate to me. But it is high. Like, it's probably over 50% of people who are using custodial Lightning wallets. So yeah, is it a default then if everyone's using the custodial ones? I mean, it really depends on how you build your app. You can make an app where your users custody their own funds, and then it's really up to you. So then there's a question of the 21 million. Yeah, Lightning respects that. All Lightning transactions are just Bitcoin transactions that you might broadcast later, or you might not if they get overridden with a new state. So they can't inflate the supply of Bitcoin because they are just Bitcoin transactions with delayed or sometimes never actually being broadcast on the network. The other big problem with Lightning, which I don't have a category for because only the next two things does it qualify for, is that payments are not reliable. One thing that often happens with the Lightning Network, at least for me, when I use it, about 15% of my transactions just don't go through. Lightning payments can fail because very often you're going from channel A to channel B to channel C to channel D, and finally your destination is in channel D. Well, maybe B and C, who you have to go through, didn't have enough money to forward this payment up through, or maybe they weren't online. And so you can have payments just fail because you hit send and it's just like couldn't find a path to your destination. That's something that is a real flaw of Lightning, and it doesn't happen on Bitcoin. Like every time you send a Bitcoin payment, it always goes through, but not so with Lightning. You sometimes have failures, and for me, it's pretty high. It's about 15% of the time. So, or I think I said 10, something like that. Way too high. The payment failures are way too high, especially when you get into big amounts. If you're doing anything over like $150, you've got a pretty high likelihood of you'll need to try it like several times, and maybe with different wallets to get it to go through. So that kind of sucks. Sometimes doing a Lightning payment can take longer than doing a Bitcoin payment because on Bitcoin it just happens and it is approved 10 minutes later, whereas on Lightning that might happen. Maybe you're able to make the payment and it just goes through instantly, but maybe not. Like maybe you'll have to try 5 different times with 5 different wallets, and before long you've spent 25 minutes trying to do a payment. So yeah, it's usually faster than the Bitcoin network, which is why I have a Lightning bolt going there because it's quick, but not all the time. Sometimes you have so many failures it makes it take really long. Yeah, so those are issues with if you're considering developing on Lightning. Be aware of those things. This is one of the better ones. There's a lot of greens in the Lightning network, and that is one of the best things for developers right now. Alby is a Bitcoin extension that tries to emulate a MetaMask-like experience. I meant a browser extension. It's a browser extension that tries to emulate a MetaMask-like experience, but it supports the Lightning Network, which is really cool. So in my opinion, their developer tools are some of the best. Well, they probably are the best in the Lightning ecosystem, even better than LND because it's much simpler. LND is a Lightning Network daemon that gives you like everything you can possibly do with the Lightning Network. Alby just gives you the basics, and they make it like a really simple JavaScript interface for sending payments and receiving payments and creating Lightning addresses and doing all sorts of stuff. So they're really, really simple and really easy to use, and they make developing just a joy. You also get the benefits of having reduced transaction fees. You get compatibility with Lightning oracles because Alby is just a Lightning wallet. It's just a Lightning wallet. It does have the same unreliability issues as Lightning because it's just a Lightning wallet. It allows you to. It has the same problem of serverless contracts, where if you're trying to do some kind of contract between two parties, you can do that, but the server is going to have to be online the whole time. I think that's usually fine though. People don't really care if some third party has to stay online as long as they don't. People seem to be fine with that. Self-custody is definitely possible with Alby, but it is not the default when you install the browser extension. It gives you like 2 options. Do you want to create a custodial wallet, or do you want to set up your own self-hosted one? Setting up your own self-hosted one, when you click that one, it's like install LND and then go find your macarons and give us your passwords and stuff. Or not give us, give the browser extension your passwords. And everyone just gets really daunted by filling out this form to set up your own, so they always just click the custodial one. And so everyone just uses LB custodially, even though it is possible to use it in a self-hosted manner. No one does. So that kind of sucks if you're going to be developing stuff that uses Alby, in kind of, you're trying to make applications that you might use MetaMask with, and you decide to use Alby as sort of a drop-in replacement. Be aware that you're kind of giving the assumption that all of your users, or almost all of your users, are going to have their funds in a custodial Lightning wallet. And there are some problems with that, especially in terms of the 21 million Bitcoins. Because it's a custodial wallet, custodians can do this thing where they have liabilities to their users that exceed their reserves. So it's possible for Alby, for example, to credit people with 10 Bitcoins, but they only have 5 that they actually own, and so they have more reserves than they have more liabilities than they have reserves. And that's effectively inflating the Bitcoin supply. The more custodians you use, the more people have the power to pretend they have more Bitcoin than they really do. And those pretend Bitcoins are effectively a way of inflating the supply, of creating more coins floating around the ecosystem than are actually backing these protocols. So yeah, there's a danger with that. Just with any custodial service, it doesn't necessarily reflect the 21 million coin limit. Only to the extent that that the service provider is honest and has the same number of reserves as their liabilities. Only if they're honest and do that, do you respect the 21 million coin limit. But as any custodian has probably found, or as many custodians have found, it's very profitable to not do that and to do the opposite. So yeah, be aware of that. It may not be. If you're using a custodial solution like Alby, or a typically custodial solution, that can be a problem. Let me just go and check if there are any questions so far. Okay, we do have some questions. So I'm going to stop. Is it okay, guys, if I do some questions during the middle of this thing, or should I keep going and then do them all at the end?
Sure, it's up to you.
Okay.
Yeah, you have the floor.
Okay, cool. So the gentleman says the other part of how zero-knowledge Bitcoin works, the multi-sig addresses are all self-custody, but the 203 keys are unknown to the owner using witness encryption. That's a cool comment, but it doesn't sound like a question. So cool. Glad you're informing us about this. I've never heard of ZKBTC, so I'd love to learn more. If you want to share a link on that, that'd be great. It might be useful to note which of these services are ordinals capable, and which new comments keep coming in. I can't keep up. Yeah, that would be useful. I'm not very interested in ordinals, and I didn't make that a category. So sorry, you'll have to find someone else to present about. I'm sure there are people presenting about ordinals later in this series, or probably even earlier.
Yes, there are.
Okay, cool. Is there a reason you have reduces TX fees to no for base layer when we have discount on SegWit? Well, yeah, because it's the base layer. Like I'm comparing it with Bitcoin itself. So if you have Bitcoin transactions that some are definitely cheaper than others. A transaction that only sends to Alice is definitely going to be cheaper than one that sends to Alice, Bob, Carol, and Dave. Or a transaction that uses SegWit is definitely going to be cheaper than one that doesn't. But you're still just doing a base layer transaction. So to me, it's not reduced in comparison with the base layer itself. So that's why I'm just categorizing it, the entirety of base layer transactions. Is it lower than that? Well, no. If it's a base layer transaction, it's not lower than a base layer transaction by definition. Next question, does Bitpac use Taproot and Schnorr to sign multisigs? If so, could it also decentralize the Oracle? Yes, it does use Taproot and Schnorr to sign the multisigs. It's essentially a Schnorr, a Taproot web wallet, and it stores your private key in local storage on your browser, so you only have control of your private key. Could it also decentralize the Oracle? Well, there is no. Yes, you could. You could have the Oracle's key itself be like a threshold multisig of 4 or 5 people. I don't count that as decentralization. I count that as a federation. So if you have a 3 of 5 multi-signature or something like that, that'd be a federated thing. And I count federations as different from decentralized. They're essentially a corporation at that point. And I don't consider a corporation, even if it has multiple people, I don't consider them decentralized. So yeah, it wouldn't decentralize it, but it could be, in some circumstances, using a federated oracle would be better. Or some people would prefer that to using, just one person. The next person has 3 questions. Can we test Bitpac via API? Nope. I don't have an API for it. Still working on it. I want to make a downloadable version that has an API, but I haven't made it yet. Yes, the website is bitpac.org. Is there any GitHub repo you can share? Sure. I will just pull that up. Super testnet Bitpac. Here you go. There's that. What are your thoughts of how to resolve disputes with multisig and in general without a third party? Well, multisig makes it really easy to resolve disputes. You can just have some set of one or more third parties resolve it for you by voting. And that's kind of what I designed Bitpac for. So that's my thoughts on that part. And then in general, without a third party, much harder in Bitcoin to resolve disputes without a third party. There have been some proposals. No one's implemented it as far as I'm aware, but you could. Satoshi proposed doing an escrow between 2 parties without a third party involved, without a third party escrow. And the proposal involved funding, like one of the versions of this involved funding, both parties funding the address with more than the issue at stake is worth. And then the only way they both get out with their money is if they cooperate in how to spend it. So like if they don't cooperate, they both burn their money. It's like a mutually assured destruction kind of thing. No one's ever implemented it, as far as I'm aware, to do escrow or to do oracles without a third party. I'd like to implement it someday, but yeah, at least Satoshi had some thoughts on how to do that, and as far as I'm aware, no one's ever made it. Can we work around disputes in a decentralized way with using multi-party computation or for one of the keys that can be shared within network voters? Probably. Once you start introducing fancy cryptographic schemes that I don't understand how they work, you can probably do anything. But I don't know anything about multi-party computation, so I'm a bad person to ask about that. If Bitcoin forks, it makes things more complicated for zero-knowledge Bitcoin. Cool. Thank you for the education on that. How can I find you on Twitter? Twitter.com super testnet with an underscore. So there I am on Twitter. Simple question: what's your criteria or threshold for a decentralized system? Well, it has to be non-custodial. In order for a system to be decentralized, I think it's got to have a bunch of people independently running the network. So like on Bitcoin, everyone runs tens of thousands of people run network nodes for Bitcoin. And that makes it decentralized, is that like no one can take all of them down. But if you're having a system where only like 5 guys are running it, then it's easy to take down. It's not decentralized. I'm going to stop doing questions and go back to the presentation, and then I'll come back for more of them later. Sound good? So back to the presentation. I will do more questions after this. I stopped at when you mentioned. Yeah, so that's the one I stopped at, when you mentioned. All right, so more slideshow. So I went over Alby and all of my favorite features about that and how So the next one is Lightning Oracles. So there are a couple different implementations of doing oracles on Lightning. DLCs are compatible with Lightning Network, and there's a company called 10101.finance, well, their company name is just 10101, but their website is 10101.finance. And they're doing stuff with doing DLCs on the Lightning Network, and that's really cool. I also made an implementation of a Lightning Oracle system called HODL contracts. So that you can check out that as well. That's based in Python. If you're interested in doing something that's very easy to spin up, you can try that out. Are there good developer tools? It depends. The Python one I think is really easy to use as a developer. It's got an API and everything for using that. So I would say I designed it to be developer friendly, and I think I did a good job. But the DLC ones, the one I made is using hash lock contracts. The DLC one is using DLCs, and it doesn't have good developer tools. They've got like a closed beta for using their software, and there's no API. It's just a closed beta for their one application that does it. So that kind of sucks. But you can use it like you can use you can use base layer oracles where you have a lightning payment from Alice to Bob that only goes through if the oracle posts some information. And they don't, like with the base layer, they don't have to know that they're involved in a contract. They're just publishing some data on their website, and then you use the data they publish to settle your payment between Alice and Bob, or vice versa. So that's kind of cool. But one nice thing is that it goes so much faster than Bitcoin, because Lightning, with Lightning payments, they're often very much faster than regular Bitcoin payments. So that's really cool. Like 85% of the time, it just goes right through. And then what are some other factors about them that make them cool? I guess the transaction fee reduction that you get, since you're doing this off-chain. You can do a bunch of contracts that don't really cost anything, because it's just in your channel between you and Bob, or cost very little because it's just going over the Lightning Network. Is it serverless? Well, same as before. Alice and Bob don't have to have a server running, and they don't have to be online. They could just use regular Lightning wallets to do this, but the Oracle does. So yeah, there is a server involved somewhere. Is self-custody possible? Depends on your definition, because to me, if there's an oracle who's deciding whether Bob gets the payment or Alice does, then really Alice doesn't have control over money anymore. But I already went over how that works. For some people say that it is self-custodial, because once you hit the send button, you don't expect to have custody of your money at that point anyway. Then it does respect the 21 million coin limit, because these are just Lightning payments, and Lightning payments are just Bitcoin payments. There's no way to inflate the supply using this stuff. So that's really cool. I have a little alarm clock over here, and the little alarm clock is something that I also don't have a category for. I think this is why Lightning Oracle payments have not taken off. Is that there's a timeout on them. If Alice wants to send a conditional payment to Bob, their contract has to be resolvable within about a week. Like if you have anything that would go longer than a week, like a loan, for example. It won't work on Lightning, because Lightning payments themselves time out after 1 week. Like if I try to send a payment to Bob and it doesn't go through within a week, it goes back to Alice, or it goes back to me, I guess. And that really reduces the usefulness of these things, because very many of the kinds of conditional payment contracts you might want to do on the Lightning Network, you just can't. Like many of them just take too long. So yeah, that kind of sucks. Like if you want to bet on the outcome of a presidential election, for example, if you want to make a payment to Bob only if Biden wins the upcoming election, you can't really do that because it's too far away, and you can't make a Lightning payment that'll last until the election happens. So the alarm clock thing is a real downer for Lightning Oracle contracts, and I think it's why they haven't taken off. It's just that even though it's really cool to make a conditional payment and to add business logic into the middle of Lightning payments, you can't really do very much with them, or at least, there's a lot. There's a lot you can do within just a 1 week time span, but it's still a really big limitation, because there's a lot of stuff you can't. So the next one I wanted to go over is Cashew. So Cashew has a lot of really cool features. It is it's a tool for doing eCash mints. eCash is this idea from the 1990s where you could it was like a kind of a predecessor to Bitcoin, where you could have a bunch of people who use a common timestamping server to define whether a payment has been double spent or not, and this server allows people to buy into it, and it'll issue tokens to them, like 1 token for $1, for example. You'd buy in with $1 and it would give you 1 token, and then you could transfer those tokens around internally within the system. And every transfer has to be, stamped by the mint, who says, yeah, he's sent it to Alice, and he has not also sent it to Bob, his token. And that allows you to get around the double spending issue. So this idea from the 1990s that was a predecessor to Bitcoin has been reintroduced back into Bitcoin now that we have Bitcoin. And you can have a mint like Cashew who lets you buy in on a basis of, 10 tokens for 10 sats or something like that, or 1 token for 1 sat. And then you can transfer these tokens around within the system, and the mint will ensure that they're not double spent. But and that gives you a whole lot of cool features. Like there's really good developer tools for using Cashew mints. It's a Python application, and it's got a REST API. and anyone can spin them up. Like they're really, really simple to spin up. So there's a lot of good features for them. They do have reduced transaction fees because all of these payments aren't happening on Bitcoin. They're just happening on the Mint's server, which is cool. Are they serverless? Well, I probably should have had a depends there because the server, the Cashew server is a server. So there's definitely a server involved. But from the user's perspective, there's not a server because they're just sending payments back and forth and they're not running anything that's constantly online. It's not possible for this to be run in a self-custodial manner. The Cashew Mint has custody of all the coins. It is not possible for them to enable self-custody. That's just how mints work. You have to buy in and then you have a token that they issued and they're in control of the real money that backs that. So it can't really, whether it respects the 21 million coin limit depends on how honest the mint is. If they issue more tokens than they have in reserve, then you're not in a situation where you only have 21 million Bitcoins anymore. You've got some other system that can easily fall apart. Cashew does support the Lightning Network as a you can send the Mint your eCash token in exchange for a Lightning payment, and that gives it compatibility with actually all kinds of oracles. You can do Lightning oracles or you can do base layer oracles because the Cashew Mint also lets you send money to people into a Bitcoin address, and that transaction won't be reflected on Bitcoin's blockchain. It's just on the Mint server. It'll say this Bitcoin address has some eCash tokens, but since you can use Bitcoin addresses, you can use Bitcoin script. Since Bitcoin addresses are just hashes of Bitcoin script, and that means you can use DLCs, you can use base layer DLCs to actually send conditional payments using Cashew mints, which is really cool. It's like just as fast as Lightning, but it's all happening on this eCash server. So those are really cool, but yeah, they have the custody problems, and therefore they don't necessarily respect the 21 million coin limit. Only if the mint is honest. Which, in the history of Bitcoin, no one's really honest. So that's not a great thing. So I only have a couple more to go over. I just have, 3 more. So I'm going to go back and take a couple more questions and go back to that part. So the last question I answered, now I can't find it. It was where, I can't see the question. Sorry guys. The question was, when you mentioned that you build free and open source software, is that free as in freedom in the GNU sense? It's public domain. I release all of my software into the public domain using the Creative Commons 0 license. That way I do not have any control over what people, I have no ownership over the software I write. It's all publicly owned. So anyone can do anything they want with it, no limitations or restrictions. I have a stupid question, says Wes Smith, or says, I'm not sure who said this, Ross or Wes, I think Ross. What would be the cheapest way to have users buy our in-game arcade coins with Bitcoin and then send stamps, NFTs back to their wallet? Sorry to be so simple, but I'm not a dev. That's not a simple question, and I would need to think to figure out the best way to do that. Talk to me or other Bitcoin developers and give them a little bit of time to think about a good answer to that question, because that's a hard one. There's lots of ways to do that, and I would have to examine the trade-offs of each one to see which one's the best. Next person asks, trustless, permissionless. That's not a question. So thanks, perfect. That's also not a question. Would you be willing to share your thoughts on why the incentive design of Lightning leads to failed transactions? Because of the channels. When you make a payment from one Lightning channel to another, it has to pass through a bunch of other people's channels, and they might not have enough money to forward your payment. Like, let's say that I open a channel with someone and I have 1 Bitcoin in it, and now I want to send my Bitcoin to Dave over here, but I don't have a channel with Dave. I've got to go from my channel through Bob and Carol to get to Dave. But Bob might not have a Bitcoin in his channel, so he can't forward. If I want to send a Bitcoin and he doesn't have a Bitcoin, he can't do it. He can't get the payment over to Dave. So your wallet will try to find a path through various channels that you have channels with, or through various people who you have channels with, but there's no guarantee that anyone will have enough money to forward your payment, especially for larger amounts. So just the whole incentive design of Lightning is you put into a channel as much as you think you're going to need, and it might not be as much as someone else needs. So it can lead to payment failures. On privacy-preserving systems, what is your favorite solution? I like CoinJoins. JoinMarket is my favorite privacy solution. Joinmarket.org is their website, so check that out. Do you find it difficult to fund yourself releasing everything that way? I have lots of yes. The next question is, Cashew sounds cool, like a custodial Lightning. Is that semi-accurate? Yeah, it is a custodial Lightning, but with some additional features compared to something like Cashew. Does Cashew issue the same sats that are provided to it? Yeah, they issue a 1 token per sat that's issued that you deposit. You get a token for each one. So those are the questions we have, and let's go back to presenting because I'm nearly through. The next one is Liquid and Rootstock. I think that the gentleman previously did an excellent examination of the powers of Rootstock and Liquid, so thank you for the interlayer guy for doing that. They do have excellent developer tools, and that's really nice. Like, I think developing on Liquid and on if you're developing on Rootstock, it's the same as developing on Ethereum. It supports the same Ethereum virtual machine, and it even supports MetaMask. So you can just, if you can do something with MetaMask, you can do it with Rootstock. Liquid is very similar to working with Bitcoin, but it has additional functions in its scripting language that make it more powerful, more like. Well, it's a very powerful scripting language that can do pretty much anything. So yeah, that's really cool. I wrote down that whether they have reduced fees compared to Bitcoin depends. So far they do. So far both of them have like 0 users, maybe 3 or 4 users per block, and that makes it, because there's very little demand for block space in Liquid and Rootstock, it makes it so that the transactions are incredibly cheap, like as cheap as you can get. Less than a penny per transaction. But there are some, there's not a guarantee that would continue. Like if Rootstock became very popular, if it became as popular as Ethereum is, it would have fees just as expensive as Ethereum does, which often exceed Bitcoin's fees. So yeah, it would depend on how popular these systems are. Same with Liquid. If Liquid became very popular, fees would shoot up because there'd be a lot of demand for a limited amount of block space, and then it could easily exceed Bitcoin. So yeah, whether it has reduced transaction fees, like right now and for the last 6 years, they have both had very low fees, but that's just because no one uses them. So it really depends. If they ever see any usage, fees will shoot up. Can you do serverless contracts? Yeah, with both of them, you're just using a blockchain to store state, and so no one has to be online. No one in particular has to be online to manage that state. It's all on the blockchain, so you don't need a server to run, other than the nodes that are powering that blockchain. Is self-custody possible? No, not on either one. It's not possible. In order to bridge into Liquid or to Rootstock, you've got to send your money to a federation, and once you do, you don't have that money anymore. They do, and you get a certain amount of tokens on the corresponding blockchain that you then have custody of that, but that's not real money. That's just a representation of Bitcoin on this sidechain. The real money is not in your control anymore. And so once again, with the 21 million limit, is that respected by these things? No, not, or it kind of depends. It depends on how honest they are. If the Federation decides that they're just going to steal everyone's money and then not honor any of their liabilities, then you're all screwed. That's big problems can happen there. But yeah, if they are honest, then the 21 million coin limit is respected, and these sidechains are excellent things to use. So I have these payments between user 1 and user 2 go through a virtual machine on these things, either the Liquid virtual machine or the Ethereum virtual machine on Rootstock, and it's pretty flexible in both cases. I'm not aware of anything that you can do on Ethereum that you can't do on Liquid or Rootstock. Like Liquid has support for automated market makers, it has support for lending, it has support for roll-ups, so does Rootstock. Well, Rootstock naturally because it's just Ethereum, but with without the Ethereum token. So they both have all those features, and they're really cool, and you can do anything you want with them. And then, is this my last one, Spacechain? No, state chains is. So space chains are the next one I wanted to cover, which kind of look very similar to the previous one, except with more greens. More greens in the categorization here. Space chains are an idea that was invented by Ruben Samson a couple of years ago, and there are two implementations of them now. There's the Soma space chain by Fiat Jaff, and there's the Spacechain launcher by me, which allows anyone to launch a space chain. Are there good developer tools for them? No, there are not. There's only two implementations, and both are kind of, one's just a proof of concept that proves how they work or demonstrates how they work, but it doesn't have any developer tooling. It has no API. It's just a website where you can go and play with these things. And then the Soma one is I think it's written in Go or Scala. I have to check, but it doesn't have good developer tooling for it, and it's just being built out right now, and it's not even on mainnet. Both of these space chains that have been created are only on, mine's on testnet and Soma is on Signet. They do have a couple of, so they don't have good developer tools. They do have reduced transaction fees compared to Bitcoin. In fact, it's one of the nice things about space chains is that they're so easy to spin up that if ever demand shot up on them, it takes like 5 seconds to spin up a new one. So you just, and they all have the same security as Bitcoin. So you could just use a new one and then you'd have reduced transaction fees again. Because the space chains are a type of blockchain, and like with ordinary blockchains, you put the state of contracts on the blockchain, so it's stored by all the nodes powering it, and therefore it doesn't have any need for any particular party to run a server in order to make contracts possible. You can use whatever virtual machine you want on them. You can use the EVM or the liquid VM or whatever you want to make them work. Self-custody is possible on them. You can hold your own coins and hold your own keys. And in both of the ones that exist, that's the default. They both have a built-in, my Spacechain launcher and the Soma Spacechain both have a built-in wallet that you hold your own keys for. So that's the default for both of them. Whether they respect the 21 million coin limit depends on how the Spacechain is designed. So far, both of the ones that exist don't have any Bitcoin on them. In fact, I don't even know how you would make a Spacechain with Bitcoin on it. Because there's no bridging. Like one of the reasons they were created was to eliminate the need to do bridging between Bitcoin and the space chain by just ignoring Bitcoin altogether. So the only things they've been used for so far are for issuing NFTs. I say stable coins as well, but no one's actually done that. That shouldn't even be in there. They haven't been used for issuing stable coins. They could be though. But you basically have a sidechain that every time there's a block created on it, that block gets anchored into Bitcoin. Like you put a hash of it on Bitcoin, and then you can follow the chain of blocks on the sidechain by following the chain of hashes on Bitcoin. And it's really a cool idea that allows you to use Bitcoin for establishing the order of transactions on the sidechain and to prevent double spending. But there's no Bitcoin on these things, so you're always issuing some kind of new token which might have monetary value, and if it has monetary value, then you're not respecting the 21 million coin limit. It's like you're introducing some other token beyond Bitcoin's 21 million coins. So yeah, space chains, depending on how you use them, if you're just using them to store image data or something, that's a great thing to use them for. But if you're using them to put actual monetary value in a new token, well, you're inflating the monetary supply then by however many tokens you created. So that's space chains, and then the last one, and then I'll get to more questions if I have time, is state chains. So state chains are another proposal by Ruben Samson, who's a Bitcoin developer, and it has the most reds of anything on this list. They're really cool though. So state chains do not have good developer tools. There's only one implementation of them called Mercury State Chain. You can Google that if you want more info. And they do have reduced transaction fees. They work using this construct where everyone who wants to use a state chain relies on the existence of a central server, and the server allows you to put some Bitcoin into a multisig, a 2 of 2 multisig with you and the server, and then if you want to make a transfer to someone, if you want to transfer your coins out of that multisig, he has to cosign any transfer. And so, but what he doesn't actually transfer the coins though. You actually transfer the keys. You transfer your private key from you to whoever it is that you want to send the coins to, and then the server refuses any longer to interact with you. Like if once you've transferred your key away to someone, if you try to sign a message, the server won't let you. He will just like not co-sign, and consequently, the only person who can actually spend the money is the person who you transferred your key to. And so that's like a really cool system that allows you to do lightning fast trading and a lot of the features of the Lightning Network, but without like liquidity requirements, without channels. Excuse me. So it's a really cool system, but it's not exactly self-custodial. Like it's never self-custodial. There's always a multi-sig where you and the server have coins together, and you don't have full control over that money. When you make your initial deposit, if you make an initial deposit into one of these things, you do get a backout transaction before you put any money in that allows you to recover your coins, which is cool. So that like is self-custodial. But the moment you transfer it, the person who receives your coins can't know that they have full self-custody, because the server could coordinate with you, who still has a copy of the key. They could coordinate with you to steal the funds from the second person. So if you ever receive money on a state chain, you can't be sure you have full custody of it. You're relying on the honesty of the central server. But it's cool. The one thing that's neat about it is, even though it's sort of this pretty much custodial relationship, they can't actually inflate the supply. They can't issue more liabilities to their users than they have reserves. Every transfer of a key on there, the recipient gets to see the Bitcoin that's backing that. They get to see it, and they get to know that there actually is no way for the only thing the server can do is take that Bitcoin, but they can't inflate the supply of Bitcoins, which is really cool. So the server could take it only in cooperation with a prior holder. They could do that. So yeah, it's really fast, and it's got a lot of cool features, but it's also got a lot of reds because it's got a lot of problems. So those are the ones that I wanted to go over, and oh, I'm done. I don't have time for questions.
You made it on time.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
There we go. Thank you guys. I'm sorry I won't get to any further questions, but I will be around for
Yeah,
more
it's sort of
presentations.
already. But how
Yeah.
about, you want to do a shout out